So let's talk about Hawaii news stations. With their predictable format and overemphasis on island weather and sports, if you grew up in Hawaii, you know the three major players: KHON, KITV, and KGMB. And Hawaii loves them because they're ours. So let's rank them. So first I want to talk about each Hawaii news station. I want to talk about the things that I like about it, one friendly criticism, and my favorite or standout reporter that they have. I think they call it a compliment sandwich. And then at the end, I'll share my favorite and where I think they all rank. And by the way, if you're familiar with these news stations, let me know what your favorite is in the comments below. So first up is KHON, working for Hawaii. I think they're the most established channel in Hawaii, and according to their website at least, they are the most watched Hawaii news station. Now, I grew up in the 90s in Hawaii, and that meant that every night on TV, 6 o'clock news with Joe Moore. And back then during the news, there was no talking. There's no whispering, no joking around, no laughing. Everybody had to be quiet or else grandpa gonna get mad. And the only time that you could talk is during the commercials. For me, Channel 2 News was the channel growing up. My favorite segment was at the end of the newscast. At the 6 o'clock, they would do a little shaka thing where they would film random locals doing shaka. And of course, if you saw someone that you recognize, first thing, pick up the phone. Hey, I saw you on the news. And of course, there's And Finally Tonight, Did You Know by Joe Moore. And I think back then it was a little bit more interesting because we didn't have the internet to look up all the things. But still, it's a Hawaii classic. However, I feel like that station has sort of bottlenecked. They have wonderful talent, of course anchored by Joe Moore, who I'm pretty sure is Hawaii's favorite newscaster. But they have a lot of really great talent on that channel. I mean, there's Living 808, there's the morning news. But I think because they're so popular and established, I get a sense that it's very hard to make a lot of changes. I mean, why would you change something when it's clearly working? If you are the most popular station in Hawaii for news, any changes in that audience that's super dedicated to you, they're gonna complain. But I think as news in Hawaii changes and news stations' roles in informing the public changes, all stations need to figure out how they're gonna make that transition and change to a younger audience. I feel like KHON has the most talented roster on the air. But the thing is, there's so many talented people, but not enough airtime. And I'm sure that's a wonderful problem to have. But the thing is, when people aren't necessarily given opportunities, I'm sure some are very frustrated, but when they're not given that opportunity, then the public doesn't get a chance to get to know them. And I would love to see some of that talent on display right now. So this generation and younger generations can start making those connections to those individual talents. Now, my favorite reporter for KHON, and there's a lot of good ones there, but my favorite one is Dr. Gina Mangieri. Honestly, I think she is the best journalist that we have here in Hawaii, across the entire state, across all channels. Now, that's just based on observation and no empirical evidence at all. That's just my own personal opinion. But every time she does stories and her investigative reports, I appreciate them a lot. Obviously, she's very well educated, but whenever she speaks on air, she just sounds intelligent. There's a very big difference because you can be smart, but when you speak, you don't sound intelligent. But the way that she speaks and she explains things, interviews people, asks good questions, like, she just sounds really intelligent. And she has a really good ability to handle tough interviews, especially come election season. Now, I'm not sure if she could do news every single day, but whenever she has a report or some kind of investigative story, that's the best part of that news broadcast by far. All right, now let's talk about KITV, Island News. Now, I'll admit that this was the channel that I watched the least growing up because we pretty much had KHON on all the time. However, towards the end of the 6 o'clock news, what I would try to do is I would switch stations because on Channel 4 or KITV, there was one guy, and that was Robert Kekaula. Amazing. If you're familiar with him, then you know. There was nobody else like him on local news. I mean, yeah, I look outside and I can see a lot of local guys and they kind of look like him, they kind of talk like him. But on TV, there was no one else that looked like this guy. He didn't look like a newscaster. He just looked like some uncle that you see down at Alamana Beach Park. And the guy spoke pidgin on air. I mean, you just did not see that. And so in a similar light, as I look at the KITV news team today, I think it's the best representation of Hawaii's general population. To me, their roster is so diverse, and not just in ethnicity, but also where the reporters are coming from. If you really watch their news, they tend to focus not just on Oahu, but different parts of the state. And it's always nice because some of the reporters are not from Oahu. And so whenever they talk about the neighbor islands, you can just tell that they're excited to report about maybe where they come from. However, and this is a big however, KITV has the most production errors I think I've ever seen. Very small things, you know, sometimes it's a misspelling, sometimes it's they didn't cut to the right B-roll or the right news segment, the footer or the lower thirds on the bottom of the screen is incorrect. Sometimes the camera is on the news anchor too long and they're having to like smile for like way too long because they didn't cut to the segment. I don't know what it is. They just have a lot of mistakes. And I'm not sure why that hasn't changed over time, but if you watch a newscast, almost every newscast has some kind of production mistake. Maybe I'm the only one who notices that, but when I watch the news, it's usually a distraction when something goes wrong. All right, now my favorite reporter for KITV is Robert Wan. I don't know what it is. He just looks like he works really hard over there because they send him out to all these places where he has to do like live reporting, and it's not always the most comfortable setting. Like he's not in the studio often, like doing reports, reading off a teleprompter. He's out there interviewing people. He's out there when the weather is bad. I remember this one time when it was raining and super windy here, they sent him to Pali Lookout and you could see in the background, like the trees are like waving back and forth. And I'm like, is he gonna be okay? Like he's just standing there reporting. I'm like, probably should make that, wrap it up. He has a really great voice and almost has like a sportscaster kind of way to talk about things. And if you look at him on camera, he almost has like, it's almost like a vulnerability as he's reporting like news. And because of that, you kind of feel like he's learning things and you're learning things at the same time. Like he's bringing you along to learn things that he's curious about or that he's been assigned to. It makes it very relatable. Now let's talk about KGMB or Hawaii News now. I mean, this channel is doing so many things right. They have great on-air talent, a great roster of reporters and anchors. They also have a really strong social media presence as well as some really interesting podcasts. And of course, Hawaii's favorite weatherman, Guy Hagi. So what? Going rain or no rain? Gotta bring umbrella or no need? I mean, seriously, that's all I like, no? And if you watch in the mornings, it looks like those guys are having a lot of fun. I do just want to comment on their social media presence because it's by far the biggest in terms of local news, and they've earned it. Their social media team it's on point. But I do wish that they're a little more careful with their social media presence, especially on Instagram. Because they have such a big audience, a lot of people leave comments. And while entertaining to read some of these comments and I get a good laugh, sometimes when I read these comments, they're very hurtful. They're very mean. Sometimes there's a lot of bitterness in those comments. And it could be from locals or non-locals alike. I just wish that they had a way to somehow manage all of those comments, for lack of a better word, responsibly. That doesn't mean to censor the comments or to ban people, but I think that it looks bad when you have wonderful stories, wonderful videos, wonderful posts, and then people read the comments and they're like, is that how Hawaii people think? Because frankly, I think it reflects very poorly on the state as well as local people. So maybe they could beef up that team and just make it so that there's a way to somehow moderate or at least manage all of those comments. And my favorite reporter for Hawaii News now is Eddie Dowd. Now maybe you haven't heard of him. He's mostly out in the field, and I first remember seeing him on KITV during the pandemic because they would send him out to all this stuff. He'd have a mask on and he'd be out there doing all the things, and we're at home trying to figure out what was going on in the state. And there's this guy on TV, very likable, very personable guy, great on camera, great voice. I was actually surprised to see him on Hawaii News Now, but good for him. Now that aside, I will say that I dip into all three of these news stations every single day. Every morning as we're getting up, it's KITV. always. From the time that we wake up until about 7 a.m. We're getting ready for work, we're feeding the kids. It's KITV every morning. Then at about 7 o'clock, I change it to KHON, see those morning reporters, and get a little different perspective on what's going on in the state, but generally the stories are about the same. And then throughout the day, online or through social media, it's Hawaii News Now. Now, all that being said, my favorite news station in Hawaii is KITV4. I know I mentioned all of their mistakes, and despite all of those mistakes, all those production errors, it's my favorite channel. I just love the fact that when I see the on-air talent, it's so diverse. I love the fact that they seem to highlight other parts of the state and not just Oahu. And even those production errors, I guess I find them a little charming. And of course they have Kiku, or KIKU, which is a station that has Japanese and other types of selected programming from Asia. I mean, are you kidding me? When Kiku was off the air, people got so mad. My parents were so upset about that. How are they gonna watch your Japanese shows? So I'm glad that KITV brought it back. Thanks for watching, and aloha.